Have you ever noticed you feel more comfortable passing guard towards one side more than the other? And do you prefer one side in positions like side control and half guard? Well, what if I told you every grappler does? And not only that, over 80% prefer the same side. By sticking to the same side as everyone else and ignoring the other 50% of the human body, you're making your game predictable and playing right into your opponent's strengths. In this video, we're going to break down why grapplers often prefer one side more than the other, why you should go against this norm, and cover steps that you can follow to turn yourself from another normal Orthodox grappler to an annoying Southpaw grappler that always goes the other way and keeps your opponents outside their comfort zones. And some of the steps we're going to cover in this video might not be what you think. And if you don't already know me, my name's Sean. I'm a BJJ black belt and a founder of the BJJ education app, Digitsu, which if you want to check out, I put a link in the description with some free instructional content. So if you haven't noticed in class or in competition, most people will pass to their left, at least with their primary or initial guard pass. I even ran a poll here on this channel that confirmed this bias, with 83% of you saying you feel more comfortable passing to the left. And let's start things off by talking about how this simple preference trickles down to affect every other position in grappling. The guard passer is on their feet, they have more mobility, and they will initiate guard passes typically by stepping forward with their right leg. This opens up the knee cut to the left, or things like passing outside to the left with their primary guard pass. This then leads to the person playing bottom spending more time with their right hip down, making the guard player more comfortable fighting from guards like reverse de la Hiva and half guard on that side. Now, with most guard passes going towards the guard player's right, they'll be most often passed on this side. This leads to more time spent on bottom side control on this side, becoming more comfortable defending from this position, and at the same time, the person on top is also more comfortable attacking from that side. This then trickles down even further into escapes. Grapplers will tend to escape towards the side where they are more comfortable. For example, when mounted, most often they will escape with their traditional elbow escape to their left side, which typically results in some form of guard, like half guard, on their right hip. Or from the back, they will often try to escape by getting their head out to the left, turn their face to their opponent, which often results in some form of guard with their right hip down. Now that leaves the question, why do so many grapplers prefer going to the left side when passing guard? Well, you probably figured this out already, and it comes down to whether you're right-handed or left-handed. Now, of course, not every right-handed grappler leads with their right leg when passing guard, but in general, this is true. In fact, if you look at our non-scientific poll from earlier, the numbers line up almost exactly with the percentages of left-handed and right-handed people. In many throwing sports, the right or dominant hand is typically kept backwards in the stance to generate more power, control, and accuracy. And we see this all the time in different sports like baseball, football, boxing, MMA, and so on. What's interesting though, most pure wrestlers, this tends to be the opposite, where their dominant hand leads along with the leg on that side. This is with pure wrestling. It gets more complicated if a wrestler transitions into MMA due to the striking advantage we mentioned earlier. So wrestlers often lead with their right legs, as you want to use your more dominant hand to form a connection first. Your dominant hand typically will have better hand-eye coordination, dexterity, and strength. It puts your dominant hand closer to your opponent for tie-ups, shots like single legs. And I think this is the same reason why in jiu-jitsu, when passing, most people often lead with their right leg on their more dominant side. This is true with passes like knee cut, but also applies to outside style passing. If you're right-handed, you're going to pass to the left to keep your dominant right hand on the inside. Now, I'm not saying every grappler fits exactly into the mold I've described, and I do think the further away we move from that initial guard pass, the less confidence I have on these different side preferences, but I do think in general, they're true for most grapplers. This doesn't mean many grapplers don't pass to the right, even if they're right-handed, but most will have their initial or primary guard pass to the left, and then they might have guard passes to switch sides based on different reactions. And another thing I've seen a lot is grapplers might circle outside to the right initially, as if they're trying to pass that way, but they won't form much of a connection. They'll be really loose, and then they'll step through with their right leg and really force and commit to the pass to the left. Do any of those things describe you, or am I just completely wrong? Please let me know down in the comments. Now that we talked about which sides are more common or orthodox, now I want to talk about some of the benefits of going against the grain and being a southpaw. There was someone I trained with over 10 years years ago when I was a purple belt, let's call him Dan, who would always give me such a hard time with his guard passing. And he wasn't doing anything really crazy with his guard passing, like he wasn't doing anything I haven't really seen before, but I just found it really frustrating to stop his guard pass. And then one day I was talking with my training partner Christian, who would always talk about technique with, and I was complaining about how hard it was to stop Dan's guard pass. And then Christian says to me, which I'll never forget, it's because he passes to your left and it's so freaking annoying. And he was right. It was something I never even thought about or even realized. I love to play half guard and half butterfly guard with my right hip down to the mat. So when he would force passes the other way, my guard and my guard retention was so much worse. Even with that background and story, I never really thought too much about this though until recently. I was in a class with Jon Calestine and he was teaching a technique to switch sides when playing guard from the right hip down to get the left hip down. He explained his reasoning behind this was because most guard passers are less comfortable passing from this side. If you can find and force southpaw positions and spend more time in them in training, then you'll make things more difficult and more uncomfortable for your opponents who spent less time in these positions. This idea isn't unique to grappling. According to several studies, being a southpaw gives an edge in physical combat. Like imagine you're in a boxing match. If you're right-handed and you've only fought other right-handed opponents, but now imagine if your opponent is left-handed and their stance is different. They'll have the advantage of surprise because they'd be striking from unexpected angles. There was even one recent study in 2019 that showed southpaw boxers and MMA fighters win matches significantly more often than their orthodox opponents. And you can think of this in terms of evolution. Perhaps being a southpaw could have directly led to increased survival, and it might also explain why the percentage of left-handers is so low. If too many people are left-handed, the advantage disappears. Before we get into the steps to turn yourself into an annoying-ass southpaw grappler, I just wanted to review our definition of orthodox and southpaw. So an orthodox grappler prefers passing, leading with the right foot and right hand. They prefer primarily passing to the left, side control on the opponent's right side, playing half guard on the right hip, and escaping into guards that often result in this right hip down. And our definition of southpaw grappler is just the opposite of all these things, leading with the left foot, left hand, primarily passing to the right, preferring side control on the opponent's left side, prefer playing guard with the left hip to the ground, and escaping into guards that result in this left hip down. Please let me know if I missed anything or if there's any trends you've noticed that I left out. By the way, I'm starting a newsletter where I expand on some of the topics in my video like this one, but then also dive into some of the nerdier things like the intersection of technology, AI, and jiu-jitsu. If this is something you might be interested in, I'll be sure to include a sign-up link in the description below. Now let's talk about some of the steps you can follow to turn yourself into a southpaw grappler. If you're left-handed or happen to be right-handed and already favor the southpaw side, well, congratulations, you're done. Well, kind of. Like, it's still useful to be comfortable on both sides, you know, to switch things up, and also to be aware of these things to work on any weaknesses. That being said, all the steps I'm going to explain are going to be mostly assuming you're an orthodox grappler. The first step is just to be aware of this concept of sides and make note of your own and your opponent's preferences. For example, if you're rolling with someone or watching a roll and you notice someone who clearly is a southpaw, like they favor those positions, that's something to pay attention to, as it's less common than you might think. It's important to mention this idea of turning yourself into a southpaw, even though you're right-handed, is something you'll see in other sports sometimes. For example, some fighters who trained themselves to fight from a southpaw stance while being right-handed include Anderson Silva, Lyoto Machida, Mirko Cro Cop, and the Diaz brothers. Personally, I think training to be a southpaw in grappling might actually be easier than most other sports, as it's mostly a side effect of a few interactions and being familiar with certain positions rather than hand dominance. To make this transformation, like everything else in jiu-jitsu, you need to have ownership of your game and focus on the skills you want to develop. So one thing you can do right away in class or an open mat is when doing positional training, always try to start from the southpaw side. This can be done through positional drills or games, or doing rolls with a training partner. But maybe people don't want to go to the other side, or you're doing free rolls rather than positional training. So first thing you can do here is when passing is to always lead with your left leg, look to put that leg in the middle, and using your left hand initially to look for connections like underhooks. Then you can continue to force headquarters to the right with your left leg in the middle, knee cut to the right, force half guard on that side, pass the outside on the right, and so on. Avoid the temptation to switch back to your dominant side. Sometimes your opponent may pull you into guard with strong attachments, so you can't set this up right away, but get comfortable breaking connections and grips and switching sides. Often, which side you're passing towards begins with transitions immediately after takedowns and sweeps as well. It's important to be aware of this and pass to the other side. When in positions like side control on top, if you end up on your dominant side, you can transition to north-south and use that to work your way towards the other side. When in positions like the mount or the back, consider giving them the escape towards the southpaw side or just actively dismount towards that side. Remember, the goal here is to spend more time in the southpaw sides to develop skills and get more comfortable. Things can get a lot trickier with playing guard. This is because the guard passer has a lot of control and can often dictate which side the guard pass happens. One solution to this is to be aggressive early on, make connections, try to wrestle up, and then try to pull them back into the southpaw side. Also, when escaping, look for escapes that take you towards the southpaw side. Like for example, escape using the classic elbow escape from mount to your right, making it much more likely you'll recover on your left hip. Doing all these things are going to be challenging and painful. You need to take mindful, deliberate action to rewire habits. This can be especially frustrating because techniques you land all the time on your good side basically need to be relearned as the muscle memory isn't there. You can totally work on new techniques during this transformation, but if you're anything like me, you're going to suck at your best techniques on your bad side. So I'd say don't worry too much and overload yourself. Just try to get yourself to be effective with your favorite techniques on the other side. I would also recommend rolling primarily with those you're better than, where you can control the roll and have more likelihood of being successful on the other side. Like, think about it. It's going to be hard to try new things, work on this other side against someone who typically dominates you in a roll. Even when you're rolling with someone you're typically better than, it's still going to be hard. This is where you need to learn to lose and be okay with it. Remember, you're building new skills. Don't let your ego get in the way. Don't immediately switch sides to the side you're more comfortable on as soon as you run into trouble. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. That's all I have for today. Thank you for watching.